Hi there. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Mind the Gap. Today we got a great one. We'll be doing things a little bit differently. In a little bit, you'll be hearing a conversation that I had with a friend of mine from college. Her name is Cameron Blount, and she is a fourth year medical student at the Emory University School of Medicine. She's in the process of applying to residency programs and hoping to go into psychiatry. And we talked a little bit about her time as a pre med student, her non-traditional path to medicine, taking multiple gap years, and what life is like as a medical student, and in her case, as a married medical student. I learned a lot from the conversation, and I'm sure you will too. So stick around, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Mind the Gap podcast. To make it sound seamless. How are you though? How was the test in the morning? How's everything?
Yeah, it's been pretty good. I did just finish my month on emergency medicine here at Emory, and I really liked it. I am having to do some reflecting now about what to do with my life, but it's like a fun problem to have.
Yeah,
I don't
definitely.
know.
So do you have to take like an exam after every rotation, or are you interested in going to emergency medicine? That's why I have to take an exam.
So, pretty much in third year, at the end of every single rotation, you will have an exam, like at the national level. So, yeah, this was another kind of like national board of emergency medicine that has like this test bank that they just like pull questions from. It wasn't too bad. I've had worse. But everybody at Emory has to do a month of emergency medicine in fourth year. It varies by school. But yeah, emergency medicine is like a fourth year rotation typically. If they have it at all.
Okay, so a month
Yeah.
isn't standard for all the rotations. Some are shorter than that, some may be longer.
Yeah. If like the school that you go to has a whole year of rotations, a lot of them will be a month or two, like between actually closer to like 6 or 8 weeks. My third year was cut short because COVID. Like the class before me was affected by COVID, so they cut their year and they cut my year. So I had like 10 months of rotations. So some of my rotations were like 4 or 5 weeks or six. But yeah.
Damn. And I remember last time we were talking, you were kind of saying you're still kind of deciding what you want to do for residency. Is it getting to the point where you kind of have to make that decision, or you still kind of have some leeway?
No, this is like kind of the time of the year when it comes down to it. I think there are some times where people will make last minute decisions or they'll just apply to two specialties come September, but most people, at the end of third year, when fourth year is like starting up, you have to make your schedule for fourth year. So you have to pick like what electives you want to take and, what department you want to be working in. So you have to decide. It's kind of like a fork in the road at this point, and I'm like standing at the fork.
How do electives work in medical school? What kind of electives do you like? What are the options?
There's a lot of options. So it's like, for example, my friends who want to go into peds, there's like a NICU rotation, like the neonatal ICU. There's you can be at one specific hospital if you want to be at, um, you know, CHOA, which is the one in Atlanta here, or Hughes Spalding, which is another site, or if you want to be in hematology oncology for peds, you can do a month just in like hematology oncology, or if you want to do nephrology or transplant or ped surgery, all of those subspecialties within pediatrics, those are all electives once you're a fourth year.
So electives are basically just like focused specialties, like subspecialties. Okay.
Yeah. So like for people who are interested in emergency medicine, you can do like a month of ultrasound. You could do a month of toxicology where you're just working with doctors who are doing like poison control stuff, or like just regular emergency medicine. But yeah, all of the like specialties for residency have like subcategories that you can do like a month rotation in to see if that's really what you want to do.
And so now that you're getting at the fork in the road, what are you feeling? What's the move?
I've really enjoyed my psychiatry rotation here, and I just did a month in psychiatry and a month in emergency medicine, and I like them both because I did my psychiatry rotation in the psychiatry ER here, and so I was trying to suss out like if it was the psychiatry that I was more drawn to or the emergency medicine. And I still like both, but I think the patient population that I'm more interested in working with is in psychiatry.
Were you a psych major? You were a psych major, right?
I was a psych major, yes.
That's awesome.
Yes, and I did a lot of psych research for 3 years at Duke, yeah.
What kind of psych research? What field?
So my research at Duke was in neuroscience. It was basic science research, so I worked with mice and we were trying to figure out the circuitry that underlies psychiatric disorders and like modeling it in mice and then breaking the circuits and fixing the circuits.
Any specific type of psychiatric disorder?
Yeah, we had a model of depression, we had a model of schizophrenia, we had a model of autism, we had a genetic knockout model of autism. Yeah. Addiction, yeah.
With psychiatry, you can get a lot of really interesting and a lot of really sad cases. Like what excuse me, what's been like your most interesting experience so far in psych? Like in the ER especially, I feel like you get a lot of abrupt, like emergent cases, maybe like drug overdose stuff with amphetamines and stuff, psychosis and that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of drug-induced psychosis that we see, and a lot of times in the ER, it is kind of tough to tease out which is a substance and which is a mental health presentation. And so sometimes those patients will be admitted to the hospital just for observation for a couple of days or because they're a danger to themselves or somebody in the community. So they do get admitted, they have the opportunity to detox and metabolize that substance, and then we can get a better sense of what their baseline is and if they really actually are psychotic, if they're hallucinating, and how to best help them.
And so it sounds like most of your experience has been with like psychiatry in the emergency room situation. Have you dealt with like outpatient psychiatry and that kind of thing too?
Yeah. In the rotation, I think I was really well placed because I had a lot of exposure to different sites, which is different from Emory's. Like typically at Emory, your psychiatry rotation will be just at one site, but I was able to go see some clinic stuff. There was a specific like women's mental health clinic, and like managing medications for pregnant patients who are also on heavy doses of psychotropic meds, and a lot of interactions there with the developing fetus that, I wasn't ever privy to. There's like an addiction clinic. And then the month that I just finished was like an intensive inpatient facility for people with like mood disorders. So I've seen a large breadth of the specialty, and I like all aspects of it. Hospital medicine and psychiatry is less of my jam, but I'm sure I'll find my niche within it.
Well, whatever you end up in, I wish you the best of luck, and I know all of your patients are going to be blessed to be in your hands. They're in great hands with you, whatever specialty you end up in. And
thank you.
I'm kind of getting carried away. I'm asking you all this stuff about detail stuff, but I guess we should probably get start at the beginning. Yeah, and I guess I'll kind of like start out and kind of give you the gist of what because I know you're probably on a tight schedule. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but just to kind of give you the gist, I'm applying to medical school. I'm getting ready to apply, and in this process, I've kind of really wished that I've done my searches on YouTube of like specific schools. When you're really interested in a school, you kind of get hyped and you look it up on YouTube. You want to see interviews and people who go there. And not only that, but just in general of the process, I kind of some people are very fortunate. They're still like juniors or whatever. They're still in school. They have their advisors to talk to and mentors in their school. But for somebody like me who's 5 years now out of college, I kind of wish that I had people to talk to. And I'm fortunate to have, friends like you and other people that I know that I can kind of reach out to. And I'm fortunate that you actually like responded and, instead of like, I'm sure like a lot of these people, they're very busy and they could
Mm-hmm.
easily just have not responded. So I'm very fortunate. But for people who aren't as fortunate and they don't really have people to talk to and they're non-traditional, I'm kind of hoping to have these interviews, and it's right now it's just audio. I'm not recording the video or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
For people who are on a commute or whatever, they're working or doing whatever, they can just listen to this interview, and hopefully I'll ask some questions that most people will be interested in hearing in
Mm-hmm.
general about the process of applying to medical school and being a pre-med and being in a med student, but also some questions about the medical school that you're at. I'm hoping to do this with other people at different medical schools so they can kind of get an idea of what it's like to be a student at Emory and what you value
Mm-hmm.
there and things like that. So yeah, I'll try to keep the questions to a minimum and kind of focus it on the most important questions so I don't take up too much of your time, because I really, as you can tell from that intro, I really just love to hear all the stories and get the details. But I kind of was thinking of doing it like I sent you in that message, like a before medical school, applying,
Mm-hmm.
and then during/after.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll start with before medical school and kind of like what your path to medicine was like. Is it something that you knew from like middle school and high school you were going to do this, or was it kind of in college that you figured it out? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I really did not see myself in any other career. I don't have doctors in my family, but I knew about the type of work that my parents did in business and in law, and those things did not interest me. I wanted to be in a career like up on my feet, helping people every day, seeing different people, maybe a little bit of routine, but not like an office job. I knew I couldn't do that. And then I had some exposure to the hospital in like some volunteer settings in high school. I shadowed a little bit in the summers, and just like answered phones and passed out papers to patients and like stood at the door in a polo and like directed them around the hospital. But then in college, I was pretty much riding that like pre-med train. I feel like my high school did not prepare me well for Duke. I went in like very much was in over my head at Duke, and yeah, the first year like really knocked me down, and I felt like I was going to have to take a step back and kind of reassess like if this was something that I was capable of doing, because yeah, I ended up not doing well in like a lot of the pre-med courses, and just kind of got what I needed to graduate, but then like needed to finish I think it was the physics series, and I retook organic chemistry 2 because I withdrew from that in my junior year. I know what it was, Gen Chem 2 and Orgo 2. I took Gen Chem 2 after I graduated from Duke, and I retook Orgo because I withdrew from it midway through the semester at Duke. I was like, I can't do this. But yeah, I joined the EMS squad at Duke and got my certification like my sophomore year in North Carolina, and then was on the volunteer squad and was on call and responding to emergencies all around campus. So that kind of told me that yes, medicine is still something I want to do if I'm capable of doing it, but I think being in EMT, I was not satisfied with just the pre-hospital side of medicine. I wanted to know more. And so that kind of solidified that I was going to need to go to med school.
And so like when you were answering these calls and stuff, that was while you were still in school or after you graduated Duke?
No, it was my sophomore and junior and senior year. So like 2.5 years while I was taking classes. I also had shifts, volunteer shifts. We would go to base, which was an apartment on Central Campus, and we had our bag there and all of our supplies and our like oxygen tanks and our radios and our computers, and then we had like an SUV that we would all drive around to wherever we got dispatched to. We were fully dispatched by I think it was the police. Wherever the office was that Duke Police was working out of, that's where we got dispatched from. And yeah, we would respond to calls.
So you would be responding to mainly student calls or calls around the Durham community?
It was on Duke's campus, but it was anybody who called from Duke's campus. So if it was, somebody's parent or grandparent that was visiting campus and they fell and they hit their head, or they were short of breath, or they broke something in the gym, or, whatever the case, if somebody had heat stroke at a basketball game or a football game, we were responding with the paramedics, and we often got there before the paramedics. So really, we were truly like the first responders because we knew the campus a little bit better too.
For a lot of people, I feel like in our situation, they have these classes that they struggle with, and it's these classes that you think are like essential to be a doctor, like organic chemistry or biochemistry. And now that you've gone through medical school, how important is it to, like, if you withdraw from a class or you get a C or a D or whatever, you have to take it again? Does that mean that you're not going to be a good doctor, like compared to people that who've like aced those classes? Does it really translate to how good of a doctor you are?
No, I think honestly, once you get to the next step, there are less and less people looking at what you have or haven't done in the previous part of your life. When you get to med school, nobody cares about what you did in high school. When you get to college, people still sometimes talk about their accomplishments in high school, and it kind of matters a little bit to people. But of course, once you get into med school, we're all at the same med school. It doesn't really matter what you got on the MCAT because you're there. And it's kind of the same thing in residency. Like, everybody who passes the board exams and matches and then goes on to pass their national board exams, they're all doctors. And the training is very, it's consistent across the board. So there are national benchmarks that you have to meet. And then outside of that, your ability to recall the enzyme that is the enzyme that's dysfunctional in a pathway, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be a good doctor, because I still look those things up.
Okay, and so would you say that the EMT role that you did was kind of one of the big factors that led you to pursue medicine? Is this something that really helped you prepare? Have you used a lot of the skills that you learned while you were an EMT in your time in medical school?
Yeah, I think it was a good use of my time because it familiarized me with the patient interview, taking a history and doing a physical. So I feel like I had a little bit of a leg up there compared to my classmates in the very beginning. But of course, that playing field levels out pretty quickly, and then we all have the same set of skills. But yeah, I think being an EMT is not necessarily what prompted me to go to med school. It was just further confirmation that I wanted to be in medicine, that I wanted to be a doctor, that I wanted to have a full grasp of all of the pathophysiology behind what patients were presenting with, in order to treat them. Because I felt I felt scared going on calls as an EMT because I felt like I didn't have the knowledge base, and that there were still more things that I needed to know in order to best help this patient. So that was kind of I felt that I could be more comfortable in an emergency situation or whatever situation for a patient that I'm working with if I have all of the knowledge possible.
Gotcha. Okay, and you talked a little bit about the research that you did. Do you think that your basic science research was a big factor in you applying to Emory or getting into Emory, or do you think it helped you prepare for medical school? How essential do you think research is to medical school?
Yeah, I think research should be a thing that you do because you're interested in it, and it is a lab and a project that you're passionate about. And so coming from my psych major background, I really was on the Duke Neurobio website for the faculty, all of the PhDs, and I emailed a few of them after looking at their pages and seeing what kind of research they were conducting. And I talked to a woman who ran a genetics lab, and we had a very short interview. She was very nice, but the conversation really was not one that got me excited about the science that she was doing. And so I said no to working in that lab. And the lab that I worked in for 3 years was the second one that I sought out. And the energy was, I got more excited about the science in that lab and felt that I would be supported by that PI. And after working with him for a few months as a senior in college and contributing to a research project, I was able to get my name on a paper that I contributed to, like the analyses after the research had already mostly been done, but I contributed and helped with the analysis. And that was a surprise to me that my name was going to be on the paper as a senior in college. But, my PI wanted me to be aware that my work should be recognized. And I think hearing him say that and knowing that he was fully supportive of me and my goals in the future, I said, this is a place where I'd like to stay, and these are relationships that I'd like to foster, and this is somebody that I can see myself working with more long term. And so the plan was originally to do 2 gap years, or maybe one, 1 or 2, but it ended up being 3 because I was also burnt out and didn't want to rush into getting right back into school and all of the prerequisites for med school. But I was happy to just do the work with that lab because I enjoyed working with everybody in that lab, and I thought that the work that they were doing was very important. And I'm going back this year to do more research.
You're going back to the same lab?
Yeah. I'll be there for 5 months.
That's great. And were you doing work? Were you working as an EMT? Were you doing anything else or just focusing on research after you graduated?
Yeah, so after I graduated, I didn't do shifts with Duke EMS, but I did volunteer to help with CPR trainings and other events that they put on around campus. But mostly it was just working my 9 to 5, saving a little bit of money. It was so nice to go home and not have homework or other extracurriculars that I needed to do for school. So I fully enjoyed working for a year, and then my second gap year got back into studying for the MCAT and then knocking out those prerequisites, Gen Chem 2, and retaking Orgo.
Nice. And you took those prereqs online through Duke or through a community college thing, or you went back, or how did you do that?
Yeah, so I took Gen Chem 2 at Duke, so I had to register through continuing education at Duke, which was a process, but we persevere. And then I took Orgo at North Carolina Central University. So I registered and then just took 1 class, and it was in the summer. It was a few weeks in the summer, and so it was nice to just for a few weeks only focus on Orgo, because otherwise, trying to do Orgo and 3 other classes was not working for me in the past. So
okay, and kind of to wrap up this pre-med school thing, what would you say, looking back, is one piece of advice or a few pieces of advice that you would give your past self of what you could have done differently to better prepare for medical school, or what you wish you would have done differently, I guess? Not in general, not in life, but just in terms of medical school. Is there a class you wish you would have took, or do you wish you would have went to done research earlier or anything like that?
Okay, I see. No, I think that the rigor of Duke prepared me for med school, and the way that I kind of spaced out my classes so that, right before taking the MCAT, I had a refresher in chemistry and Orgo. I was like, oh, I am not afraid of any Orgo on the MCAT anymore because I just had it again. And I did take an anatomy class at Duke, which was helpful. I think I took anatomy in high school as well, but then went to the cadaver lab and took the evolutionary anthropology class at Duke, where we were able to see the dissections that I think the PT students or the PA students at Duke were doing the dissections. And then as college students, we were able to go see the dissections once they were done, and we were quizzed on, body parts. And yeah, I think getting like the intro to physiology in med school, I didn't think it was going to be as hard to pick up as it was. Like I still have to like slow down and really think about, okay, this happens, then this happens, then this happens. Otherwise, it's very easy to get confused, especially like cardiac physiology and pulmonary physiology. So,
How would you say, like, thinking back to being an undergrad, and Duke is a pretty rigorous school, but I think in general, like a lot of schools, if you're in college, a lot of majors, they require a lot of rigorous coursework. So how would you say, your time in medical school and how you have to study and like be disciplined compares to, taking a bunch of pre-med classes like orgo and biochem and maybe some other classes that are pretty intense, computer science and other stuff, and psych classes? How would you say is medical school just like on a completely different level, or is it something that it just requires a little bit more discipline?
I think the discipline is pretty similar. The thing that I can say is different between college and med school is in college, once I stopped running track and was just like taking classes, then I felt like I had a little bit more free time during the day, and I kind of like backloaded all of my work to the evenings and was just like staying up really late getting all of that stuff done, because I didn't have class until like 10 a.m. some days or whatever. But med school is not like that, so I kind of now have like front loaded it. But med school is nice because you're singularly focused on one subject at a time, and I really appreciate that. It allows for like a thread to be woven a little bit more nicely, rather than jumping from physics to your writing course and your seminar and whatever else that you have to do. So
Okay, so let's go into like the process of applying to medical school and what that was like. So when you were coming up with, I guess, talk to me about like what it was like applying to medical school as a non-traditional applicant. Like, how did you kind of go it on your own, or did you go to meetings through like the pre-med department or group at Duke, or what was that like? Did you just ask your people that you knew, mentors and stuff?
yeah, I think I was really fortunate in that I was still physically at Duke and had my Duke email address and was able to access all of those pre-med resources that they had laid out for us in those like portals. And they wanted us to put in our transcripts and set up appointments with advisors and all of these things that we had to submit so that Duke could write us a letter of recommendation for med school. I was very lucky in that I still was connected in that way and could just like walk to the office, the pre-med advising office, if I had a question. And so, for people who are a little bit more outside of their institution where they went for undergrad and they're still needing like some resources or some transcripts or like the standardized letter, I can't remember the name of it now, but
The committee letter?
yes, the committee letter, to just like try to reach out to people who may still be at that institution, or like try to make those connections with that office early, so that they know to like rope you in, because the way they just blast out the emails to the current, seniors who are applying or juniors who are applying to med school is like, it's easy to get lost in the shuffle.
Yeah. What would you say, thinking back to your time as an applicant, what would you say your non-traditional quote unquote status brought to your application? Like, do you think obviously there isn't like a blanket statement for everybody. Everything's kind of like a case by case basis. But I know a lot of medical school advisory committees and stuff, they talk about how there's an increasing percentage of people who are taking gap years and stuff. What do you think, like being a non-traditional applicant, especially like you and like me who have multiple years, like some people they just take 1 or 2 years and they go
Mhm.
back, but multiple years, what do you think that really brings to your application? Do you think the maturity and wisdom that you've gained has really like affected you in your medical school studies?
Yes, absolutely. Taking a gap year is so valuable because when you have to work in, I don't know, a collaborative office or, corporate or scientific environment, you have to communicate with your coworkers, you have to establish professional relationships, and that's not something that you really have a lot of experience with in college as far as the logistics and like the emails and just talking to people who are older than you and relating to them and creating a rapport like you would with patients. And so I think just having the ability to talk to people in, different levels of authority in wherever that you end up working in your gap years is a really, really valuable skill that not everybody has had that time to develop that skill. And I think it's really valuable in med school to see that.
When you were applying to medical school, did you were you thinking mainly, like were you looking at MSAR and looking at their mission statements and kind of creating your school list based off that, or were you more focusing on the, like pre-meds typically do, like type A students, they focus on what the GPA average and MCAT score, like did those really, you know, did those prevent you? Were those things kind of like, oh, okay, this GPA, average GPA or median GPA is like a 3.9. I don't even need to bother applying to those. Or was it something like, okay, I have more experience. I may not have had like a super stellar GPA, but I have a pretty good MCAT, or even if you don't have an MCAT, a great MCAT, I have like a lot of experience. I might as well give it a shot. It's not going to be like a for sure target school or whatever, but it's like a school that, I don't feel like I'm just wasting the 150 or $300 or whatever to apply to.
Is that how expensive it is? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I mean the primary, I think it's like 100 something, and then the
Yeah.
secondaries is an additional 100 something probably. Maybe some are cheaper, some more expensive maybe, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I did use MSAR a lot and then created a pretty extensive list of schools. So I really wanted to just be around my support system. That was the most important thing for me, and to be serving a patient population that was diverse and where the makeup of the physicians kind of paralleled that of the patients that they were treating. And so, with all of that in mind and the mission statement that resonated with me, I wanted to stay kind of in the southeast because this is where my family is. These are where, the patients that I want to be treating and working with and improving their health. It's down here in the southeast. So, I applied very, very broadly, and a few reached schools, maybe 5. But Emory was my top choice, and I was happy to get in off the wait list. I thought I was going to be going to a school in DC. I thought I was going to be going to a school in Miami. And Emory called me in, I think, late May, and asked if I still wanted to come. And I like fully was going to be moving to Miami, but had to direct, my storage pod. I had to call them and be like, actually, can you take it to Atlanta in July, please? Thank you.
And so what that's another question is like, what is the time, like for a lot of people the timeline might be a little bit different, but there's some commonalities. How early did you submit your primaries, and like when did you start getting secondaries and that sort of thing?
So I heard a lot of horror stories about, well, from the pre-med advising office and also from people who I knew in years above me who had matriculated through med school, like like everybody on the EMS squad ended up in med school, and a lot of them went straight through. So they were like third year. Some of they're like attendings now, but I was able to reach out to them. They're in med school for a year, and I talked to this guy who was on the squad with me, and I said, so like, how soon were you submitting your secondaries and your primaries? And he was like, no, actually the day it opened. Yeah. He said he submitted like the primary, got everything together before he was able to submit it, and then submitted it so that he could be like first in the processing line and everything. And then he said he was like driving to somewhere in Durham, and he got the email that he got a secondary from his top choice, and he fully turned around, went home, drove home, and did the secondary that day that he received it in his like email inbox. And that's where he graduated from med school. He fully was like, I don't know if he was a senior at Duke or if he took 1 year. I think he went straight through. But he was like driving around in Durham, got an email from UNC, the secondary, drove home to type UNC secondary and send it back like that day or the next day.
So he just kind of like on the fly did the secondary, or he kind of already knew what the questions would be and prepared, or he just went home and just answered them off the dome?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know exactly all of the details. I assume that he knew that this school was his top choice, and so he had an idea of what the questions would be and probably drafted something ahead of time. If I had to guess, that would be my guess, because that's the type of person that he was. But I didn't pre-write my secondaries. I did notice that they got better as I continued to write them, but I wrote my top choice secondaries first, and I, looking back, realized that those were not the greatest essays, and like as I continued to work on secondaries, like they got better and better. So I wish, in retrospect, that I would have done like 4 or 5 secondaries from schools that, I would be happy to go to, but they weren't necessarily my top choice. And then maybe like secondary number 6, that now that you've like worked out the kinks in your responses, now you can submit that secondary and you can feel good that like you've read over those answers a couple of times and it flows and it sounds good and it's compelling, stuff like that. But as early as possible.
Did you apply to both? Because I know you're from San Antonio. Did you apply through TMD, SAS, and MCAS?
Sure did. It was a pain. Yep.
Yeah, and I don't like how soon after you submit your primary do you expect second? Because I know through AMCAS, a lot of the schools, they just kind of, some of them they have some screens, but a lot of them, once your primary is verified, they just send you the secondary or whatever. So how soon does that happen? Like a week after, 2 weeks?
I'm trying to remember exactly. I think for like Texas was a month earlier, right? So I think where I messed up was I didn't use my dad's address in Texas. So I looked like I was an out-of-state applicant. Yeah, so don't do that. If you're from Texas and you have family in Texas that you live with, just go ahead and use that Texas address. But yeah, and I didn't get a lot of interviews in Texas. I was very sad, but I know it's very much an in-state, like insular kind of process.
Yeah, I think state schools in general, not just in Texas, but especially like California, the UC schools, they're very in-state biased. Like they really want to take people from their own state. But yeah, so I guess get it in as early as you can, but probably try, like from what I hear, and probably I guess you would probably say this too, you want to get people to review your application, because even though you submit it early, if your stuff isn't really on par, not even just like grammatically, but just like if you really don't have like a compelling, you make your narrative sound like interesting, not just like run-of-the-mill stuff, which honestly is kind of cliched at this point, because how many people are applying to medical school? Thousands and thousands. It's probably going to be the same story or the same gist of the story, but it's just a matter of kind of like how you add your style and your personality to it.
Exactly. I had a lot of people read my personal statement. And even some of my secondaries, I sent them to my parents, and then my PI and another like postdoc who was in the lab who knew me well. And those were like the only kind of people that I trusted to read the secondaries, because I don't know, they were short and I like didn't want to mess those up. But my personal statement, I had like 20 people review it and give me feedback, and that was honestly too many. Because then it was like too many cooks in the kitchen and my voice was being like watered down and stuff. And so I think like having 3 or 4 people who know you well, and who have like been through the process, I think is important, because I don't know, my parents have good insights into like what is good writing, but hearing feedback from people who are in med school or have been through the application process is like a different insight that's important to have as well.
And do you think like when you're writing these stories, you want to be almost not artistic, but you want to be kind of idiosyncratic a little bit, and not to the point where it's like, abstract art kind of stuff and you're just kind of like making stuff that might seem kind of weird to some people? But do you think it's okay to kind of be a little more on the philosophical side, or like, you know not as cliched? I don't really know what other word to use for it. Or do you just kind of think it's better to stick to kind of like the classic stuff? Don't use big words, don't use poetic language, don't be like overly flowery with your language, but make it interesting. Like, how would you advise,
Yeah.
like, how should people distinguish themselves in their personal statement where it's like, why medicine? And a lot of people are probably going to have, pretty similar stories.
It's so hard. The personal statement, I'm like getting back into that mindset now, because you have to write a personal statement for residency, and I'm like, why this specialty, But I think, they say like don't talk about your family members who are sick and all this stuff. And I think like generally those like pointers are not super helpful, because if you have something very, very like compelling to say, and if it was really impactful in, your pursuit of this career, then I think there's a way to say it that's not cliche. That's why I say it's like important to have other people read it, because I've read a few personal statements where it was like, I want to do this because I want to make my mom proud, and my mom has always been like a strong person and I look up to her, and so I want to be strong like her. And it's like, are you doing this for yourself? So that I understand the sentiment, but like somebody else is going to read that personal statement and be like, does this person really understand what it's like to have a career in medicine? And so for me, what I think I was trying to make my personal statement say was, yes, I have stumbled previously in the like classroom aspect. But because maybe you want to address some red flags in your application, but also the personal statement, you don't really have to, unless there's like really something glaring. But honestly, I didn't. I kind of just said like, I have pursued medicine very consistently for many, many years. And I know that from this experience, that like I have been exposed to what it's like to have a career as a doctor in a little bit of a sense. And like all of my experiences in and around healthcare have only solidified that decision for me. And I'm like very committed to overcoming like any hurdles that are set in my path based on like my history, So it's like, I know that you see my application and you may think that this is a red flag, this score, whatever, but I think more so that my application was trying to be a story of like determination and resilience, that I was never gonna give up, and that I was always gonna like fight for it and persevere, which I think they like to see. And I made it, so.
Yeah, and you didn't just made it, you did excellently. But did you feel like that was something you kind of had to explain in your essays and your narrative, in terms of like, you've been interested in this since high school, why didn't you just go straight into medical school? Like, why take the 3, or in my case 5 years to apply to medical school? Did you feel like that was something you had to address, or you just kind of let it speak for itself?
No, I don't think gap years are a detriment at all. I think you should absolutely play up the things that you've accomplished, and like the self-discovery that you have made in this time. It's like a lot of time for reflection and a lot of time for personal development, and none of those things are negative. So I kind of said that as well. Like, I kind of made a nod to this in some of my interviews, that I was like, MD or MD PhD? Well, I did all this research, so now I'm sure that if I want to do research, I can do it as a clinician, I can do it as an MD. Research is, great. It's very close to my heart, but it's not, my primary focus is going to be patient care in the future. So I want to make sure that, the program that I went into was really strong in their clinical development.
Okay, and one of the other questions, which I think you already answered, is kind of like what you would have done differently when it came to applying medical schools, and you kind of talked about that with secondaries and like, wishing that you did like the schools that you didn't really care so much about, or that were kind of like, not
my top choice. Yeah, don't do your top choice first. Yeah.
All right, and now let's get into like the whole during medical school thing. So you're at Emory, one of the great medical schools in the United States, and therefore, arguably in the world. So, and you're your fourth year?
I've just started my fourth year, yes.
Started your fourth year. So talk to us a little bit about the curriculum in Emory and what that's like throughout the 4 years.
Yeah, I think, coming in and going to lots of different interviews, it was hard to distinguish how the curricula were different between schools. There are a lot of institutions now that do 2 years of preclinical in a year and a half, which is the Emory model. But in going through the curriculum, I'm very happy with it, and I will say that I think Emory does a really good job of easing you into medical school, because the first year is broken down into healthy human, which is kind of just physiology, normal human physiology, metabolism, immunology, embryology, things like that. And then you move into human disease, which is the pathophysiology, and that's broken down by body system. So you'll do skin, muscle, bone, joint is a module, pulmonology, cardiology, GI, renal, things like that. So I also think that Emory does a really good job of setting aside time for students to pursue their interests in whatever extracurriculars they want to pursue. And they fold in time for you to volunteer and do community service and get outpatient experience in the first 2 years. I know that is like a thing that many institutions say that they emphasize, but Emory is very serious about it. You do your healthy human physiology, and you learn how to do a history and a physical, and then you are set up with a preceptor, and you go to clinics every 2 weeks, and it's like a primary care practice most often. And yeah, you'll work with that preceptor for a year.
Yeah. Do you guys have like a student-led free clinic kind of thing?
We have like 6. Yeah, so I was able to volunteer with a lot of those. There's a primarily Spanish-speaking clinic. There is a men's clinic, which is working with unhoused populations kind of in downtown Atlanta. That's on Wednesday nights. And we go with a doctor, of course, and a couple of students, and we bring a lot of resources with us to give to patients who are at the shelter that night, so that they have access. And then there is a women's clinic. There is a free clinic in Clarkston, which is a refugee resettlement community on East Atlanta, which is where my primary care facility was also. So there's a really wide breadth of experiences for students who want to be in the clinic before their rotations start.
Wow, that's beautiful. And so you can start doing that, like how soon can you get involved in that?
Oh my goodness. So like, you will come in and be paired with an upper level medical student if you want to be in one of these clinics before you finish the the curriculum where you learn how to do a history and physical. But primarily you get involved with the clinics after you've completed that curriculum.
So probably after your first year or after the first, like, half year, or what do you say?
Oh, it's called, sorry. Essentials of Patient Care. I just remembered the name of the thread. So Essentials of Patient Care at Emory is like every week or so you are learning a new piece of the history and physical. So first is the history and a few mnemonics to help you make sure that you're asking all of the right questions. Because I think in the first 2 years, it's kind of like trying to figure out what's important to ask. So you get that piece of it, and you practice with each other, and you practice with standardized patients in the OSCE suites, which is where you simulate, being a doctor. And then you move on to learning parts of the physical exam. You'll do the heart exam, the lung exam, the abdominal exam, special maneuvers for all of that. Musculoskeletal, the neuro exam is pretty intricate. So you learn them like piece by pieces. You learn it in pieces, and you're learning it kind of throughout your first year. So, we got into the clinics before we had done all of the pieces of the physical exam, but I remember like learning how to do the neuro part of the physical exam and then seeing a patient in clinic that had a chief complaint of dizziness. And then I was able to do this full neuro assessment because I was learning that at Emory, and then I was able to implement it in clinic.
Damn, that sounds awesome. I mean, that sounds like the ideal way, when you're an undergrad and you're doing the lecture and then you're also doing the lab. The lab, I guess, is like the effective way to actually understand the concepts, and this is kind of like the analog to that. You're actually getting to see real people with real problems and practice that. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, the faculty have been really good about, fostering an environment that's conducive to learners. My preceptor was very open about see one, do one, teach one. So I would observe, and she would talk me through the steps as she was doing it. And then it was expected that the next time that we saw a patient with such and such chief complaint that I was going to be the one to do the assessment in the physical. And so she kind of encouraged me to put my skills to use, even though they weren't perfect, knowing that I was fully supervised and she was always there. But in order to facilitate the learning, you have to be pushed by people who are a little bit more senior than you. Otherwise, I was very comfortable staying in that box.
So the first year and a half, you're in the academic setting, you're learning the normal and then the abnormal, and then you're also kind of seeing things. It's like, it sounds to me kind of almost like shadowing, but more involved. You're like actually doing the physical exam and learning it instead of just sitting there and watching the doctor do it. And then after that first year and a half, you go into your clinical rotations.
Yeah, so I would say it's definitely a step above shadowing. It's like I was expected to go see patients on my own and gather the information and do a preliminary physical, and then I was reporting back to the attending or my preceptor, and I had to say, so-and-so lady in room 4, she's a 75-year-old lady with this medical history, and she's coming in today with a chief complaint of this, and it's been going on for this long, and she also has these other associated symptoms, and when I did her physical exam I found this and this and this. That was as far as you go in like the first 2 years, and then in third and fourth year it's like, and now I want to do this for this patient. So, but in your first 2 years at Emory, you definitely will be expected to be seeing patients like with a concise history and physical, very focused, basically, synthesizing all of the things that you've learned in practicing with the standardized patients and your classmates.
And what's the process like of getting used to the whole EMR thing and like electronic medical records and how you do the charting and stuff? Is that kind of just go as you learn as you go, or is that like a class that you really focus on that, or no?
No, you definitely learn as you go, because the family medicine clinic that I rotated with for the first 2 years, was a different system than the one that was on my family medicine rotation, is a different one than is at Grady, is a different one than is at Emory. So wherever you go, there may be like 12 different charting systems, and you'll just learn it wherever you're working.
So it's fairly transferable. It's like if you kind of know how to do one, you can figure out the other one.
Yeah, some are more intuitive than others, but there's definitely like a steep learning curve, but yeah, it all comes with practice, and I still am not great at it, and I'm not expected to be at this point in my life, so it's fine.
And would you say, what would you say is like one of the more unique things about the Emory philosophy or the curriculum philosophy and like how they do medical school over at Emory? I mean, as far as you know, maybe you're not really familiar with how other places do it, but...
No, I think students who come out of Emory are very well prepared to be like full, well-rounded clinicians with astute physical exam skills, and like an easy demeanor about them where they're comfortable in any situation because of the sites that we rotate at. We see pathophysiology that runs the gamut from, acute to very, very chronic. And I appreciate that about Emory, if that answers your question.
And would you say there's like a commonality? I don't know if you're familiar with other, like, it sounds like you have a lot of friends from EMT and stuff who are at different medical schools. Would you say there's something about the Emory student body that differentiates them from other medical students or medical schools?
That's a good question. Yeah, I can't speak to how it is at other institutions. I do know that we all just have a tendency to get really close with our classes. It's been hard for the recent incoming classes who've had to do their learning primarily online in COVID in the past 2 years. But my class is very, very close and still is. And people are now breaking off to go pursue their other degrees, their PhDs, or heading out to do their stuff. And we have some people who are pursuing masters in public health now. But still, we're all in communication, and it's a very tight-knit group, and I've found a lot of really great friends here that I think I will keep in touch with for the rest of my life. So,
and does Emory require you to do stuff outside of like your the medical school curriculum and clinical rotations? Do you have to do research? Do you have to do like a thesis or something like that?
Yeah, so in the first 2 years, you will be doing your community learning and social medicine, which is a volunteer opportunity that is woven into the curriculum. It's integrated and it's a year long, but you get to pick the site that you will be at. I was at a mental health facility for that. Loved it. And then, yeah, the outpatient experience, also known as OPEX, OPEX, is where you are paired with a preceptor in a primary care practice. You are expected to do 5 months of research in your 4th year called Discovery, and you can break it up however you'd like. So in your 4th year, you're also doing away rotations at other institutions. You're auditioning to be a resident there, essentially. So if you need to take a month to go to Duke or wherever, somewhere in New York or the Midwest or California, in order to audition at an institution that you want to be at for residency, you can just break up your research however you see fit in your 4th year.
And then, kind of to wrap things up, like outside of medicine, what's it like being a person who's married in medical school, or, what are the stuff you do outside of medical school? How much time do you have to pursue your hobbies and interests?
Oh my gosh, so much time. I am married. I got married in medical school right after I took step 1. My husband is European, and we're working on getting him here to the U.S. We're still doing the whole immigration process. But it's fine. We're long distance. We have been long distance, but we talk every day. It's not like I don't have time to talk to him. Maybe there were some rotations where I was waking up really early to be in surgery, or I was working a night shift, and so the hours didn't really match up because it's 6 hour time difference between us. But most days we do find time to talk. I love the city of Atlanta for all of the things that are happening here. I've been to lots of music festivals, lots of concerts, some comedy shows, drag shows. I like to explore the food scene on Buford Highway, where there are a lot of first-generation immigrants who are making their native foods. It's all delicious. And the Braves just won the World Series, and so people are always up at Truist Park going to those games. You can go to the Hawks games. You can see all the shows at the State Farm Arena. We have really big acts that come, but there's also cool places like the Fox Theater and the Tabernacle where you'll see smaller shows. You can see like the ballet or Alvin Ailey. I love this city. I have not found it to be difficult to do things that I'm interested in outside of med school. You should be able to manage, like, I know in college I felt like I was going all the time and I was pulling these all-nighters and trying to cram everything in, and like maybe I was waking up late, but once I was up my day was like pretty nonstop. And I think there are, peaks and valleys in med school where things will be more busy, but it's not like there's no time to do the things that you enjoy.
And would you say it's something that, like, at the beginning of med school, you just have, you're very pressed for time, and then gradually as you progress, you have more time? Or is it just kind of up and down throughout the years? It doesn't really depend.
Yeah, I think that might be dependent on the curriculum. Emory is nice because, like I said, they ease you into it pretty well. It's not like you start with biochemistry and anatomy like day one. You'll do healthy human, and the modules are a little bit shorter, so you'll have tests more frequently, but they're always on Fridays, which I appreciated. And then you get introduced to anatomy, you get introduced to your outpatient experience, you get introduced to your community service projects, and so things kind of build in that way. But then, end of first year into second year, people have established their routines at that point. And then third year is really dependent on the rotation that you're on.
Okay. I mean, I think that we've covered a lot, and I could ask you a lot more questions, honestly, but I don't want to take up too much of your time, and I really appreciate all the time that you've been able to give to me and to the people who will end up listening to this.